Now our second and last speech in English is by Dr. Jorjani, Dr. Jason Jorjani. I give you a very brief background of Dr. Jorjani, or I better say Dr. Gorgani, as Dr. Sotude always said. That's the right way of saying it. Dr. Gorgani. Dr. Jason Gorgani was was born in New York, actually, from an Iranian father and an American mother. He has studied extensively in philosophy of science and technology and Persian history, and his doctorate is in the same field. For some years, he's now a lecturer on the same subjects at the Technical University of New Jersey in the US. He's also, since last year, the chief editor of the famous publishing company Arctos Publishing.
Infamous.
Infamous, yes. For some it's infamous, but he's actually famous. Please go ahead.
The nation state is finished. We should not refer to ourselves as nationalists, not only because the political form of the nation state is no longer relevant to the planetary scope of economic and technological development, but also because Iran is much more than a nation. Iran is a civilization, a great civilization. And we live in a new era characterized on the one hand by the force of globalization and on the other by an inevitable clash of civilizations. Moreover, Iran is not just one great civilization amongst a handful of others. It is that crossroads of the world that affords all of humanity the possibility for a dialogue of civilizations toward the end of a new world order based on something other than the destruction of distinct cultures and the deracinating unification of all peoples and nations on the basis of the lowest common denominator. In his analysis of the transition from the era of international conflict to the epoch of the clash of civilizations, one mistake that Samuel Huntington makes is to consider Iran part of a so-called Islamic civilization that includes Arabic, Turkic, and Southeast Asian elements. Islam's allegedly civilized veneer is a product of its parasitic invasion of Iranian civilization, which is a distinct world historical civilization. As I understand it, a civilization is a superculture that demonstrates both an internal differentiation and an organic unity of multiple cultures around an ethno-linguistic core, one which roughly corresponds to Alexander Dugin's concept of the narod. For example, the Mandarin-speaking Han Chinese are the ethno-linguistic core of the narod of Chinese civilization, although it includes Cantonese, Manchurian, and even Mongolian cultures. Classical Rome and its Latinate language remain the core of the Western narod, despite the increasingly significant role played by the Germanic elements of Western civilization. For the past 2,500 years, the Persian ethnicity and language has been the core of Iranian civilization, which also includes other ethnically and linguistically Iranian cultures. Kurdistan, and of course I mean all of Kurdistan, Azerbaijan, including northern Azerbaijan, Ossetia, Tajikistan, including the Tajik parts of Uzbekistan and Afghanistan, the Pashtun territories, and Baluchistan are as much a part of a distinct Iranian civilization as Spain, England, France, Germany, and Sweden are part of a Western civilization that has its origins in Greece and Italy. It should, however, be noted in this regard that the boundaries between world civilizations are never clear-cut, and that Western civilization overlaps with Iranian civilization in southeastern Europe, since Ukraine is an originally Iranian nation, the homeland of the Scythians. And the Sarmatian tribes were once dominant in Bulgaria and Croatia, also lending these European territories roots that trace back to Iran more authentically than to the rest of Europe. The same can be said of Iran's relationship with Indian civilization. The territory that is now lamentably Pakistan spent most of its history as the intersection between Iranian and Indian civilizations. Actually, to tell the truth of the matter, most of northern India, well beyond Pakistan, has spent most of its history as part of Iranian civilization. I refer not only to the Achaemenid, Sassanid, and Nadiri occupations of this area, but also to the Kushans, who were ethnically Iranian, and the Mughals, who established the Persianate culture. In other words, Iran, or Iran Shah, literally the Aryan Imperium, is the quintessentially Indo-European civilization. What I'll go on to discuss here are the fundamental principles definitive of this civilization, those ideals, concepts, or values that structure a distinctly Iranian world. The most fundamental principle of Iranian civilization is the supreme value that it places on wisdom. Khirat-garai is the reverence for, the pursuit of, and the adherence to wisdom. Zarathustra speaks of Ahura Mazda, or the Titan of wisdom, as the deity who is supremely worthy of worship. Sometimes he simply refers to this god as Mazdai, or Wise One. The opening lines of Ferdowsi's Shahnameh are Benam Khudavand Jan o Khirad, or in the name of the Lord of life and wisdom. The order of the Magi were, of course, the quintessential wise men of the ancient world, and it's hardly incidental that the first Greek to refer to himself as a philosophos, or lover of wisdom, does so only after returning to the West from 12 years of study with the Magi in the capital of the Persian Empire. I'm speaking, of course, of Pythagoras, who studied in Babylon. It's very important to note that the Wisdom Lord is not an almighty God. He is defined by the primary attribute or characteristic known as Sepand Minu, originally Spenta Menu in Avestan, the progressive mentality, or if you prefer, the bounteous or creative spirit of innovation. This is explicitly defined against an opposed spirit of constraint, constriction, and niggardliness, namely Ahriman in Middle Persian. The struggle between these two spirits, neither of which are omnipotent, is a major feature of the worldview of Iranian civilization. This dualistic opposition is what unequivocally secures humankind the free will to choose, to be a champion of innovative progress, and to promote and defend creative genius against retarding dogmas and niggardly doctrines. Ahriman, the great antagonist of Spenta Menu, is sometimes also referred to as the lie, or the Great Deceiver. This highlights the importance of truth, or arta, in Iranian civilization. Arta, or Asha Bahishta in Avestan, or Ordi Behesht in Middle Persian, means truth or right, in the sense of right order. It's a reference to cosmic order, the idea that there is a discernible meaning and intelligent purpose at work in the universe, even if its workings are opposed by a deranging force of deception. Ordi Behesht is elementally symbolized by an ever-living fire, of the kind that burns at Zoroastrian or Parsi temples to this day. It is the knowledge of this fire that is gifted to man by Prometheus, whose cult only rose to prominence in Greece after the Persian colonization. This titan of wisdom, who rebels against the godfather of the entire Greek pantheon, was raised to the status of a culture hero by Aeschylus, who also authored the Persians. Heraclitus, who was invited to become the court philosopher of Darius the Great, adopts this metaphor, together with the ancient Iranian concept of the interrelation of cosmos and logos. Implicit in the idea of Ordi-Behesht is another concept that entered the West via Iranian influence, the concept of a concept as such. One significant aspect of the Iranian notion of cosmic order is that ideal forms or archetypes of all things, called pravashis, pre-exist and shape physical instantiations of them. This was the first appearance of such a proto-mathematical and purely rational or abstract way of thinking. It influenced Plato by means of his membership in the Pythagorean order. The crystalline forms are often imagined as abiding in a realm of light, which is distinct from an abyssal darkness of chaos full of unshapely vermin. If the latter were not a distinct dimension of existence, Ahriman would have no stronghold or staging ground from which to derange the physical world and militate against the influence of the archetypal reality. It's important to note that even the creative intellect of Ahura Mazda is constrained by these archetypes, integral to Ordi-Behesht. Cosmic order is not the product of an arbitrary divine decree. Mazda himself contemplates the pure forms, or rather I should say Mazda itself, or maybe herself, contemplates the pure forms. In this sense, although Mazda is a creator whose creative genius is the highest expression of surush, or inspiration, Mazda also has a rational mind. Contemplation with the aim of understanding, the acquisition of knowledge, or the discernment of truth, only make any sense on the presupposition of a cosmic order, like that suggested by the idea of Ordi-Behesht. In the worldview of Iranian civilization, a truly human life is one devoted to the cultivation of Bahman, the best thinking or intellectual excellence that can discern and bring one into harmony with the cosmic order so that one may contribute to the great work of the creative spirit. Bahman is a contraction of the Avestan bohumana, which could also be contracted in the form of huma. This is the prototype of the Latin concept of humanitas, which is either an Indo-European cognate or found its way into European civilization through Iranian influence, possibly via Mithraism. The idea is that one is only a properly human being if one cultivates one's mind. As Darius's would-be court philosopher, Heraclitus of Ephesus says, "It belongs to every man to think well." Interestingly, although our intellectual faculty is what separates us from animals, Bahman is symbolically associated with the animal kingdom. I think this is because how we treat animals is a reflection on our own humanity. What separates us from them also makes us responsible for their welfare. There were extremely severe laws against cruelty to animals in the First Persian Empire. For example, mistreating a dog was as grievously punished as abusing a human child. This brings us to the legal and socio-political philosophy of Iranian civilization. It is radically utopian. The core concept of relevance here is Shahrivar, a Middle Persian contraction of the Avestan Shatravariya, or the desirable dominion. It could also be translated as the most choice-worthy kingship. In other words, it's the ideal form of government, that which one would choose if only one could see it. Shahrivar comes into being when Ordi-Behesht is not only discerned by Bahman on an individual basis and embodied by a single person, but when an entire political order is rightly guided to bring society as a whole into harmony with cosmic order and the creative divine intellect. Shahrivar is elementally associated with metal. This has alchemical significance. Imagine the metal sword of the just ruler being forged in the fire of Ordi-Behesht. Throughout the course of Iranian civilization, beginning with Zarathustra's alliance with the Shah Khostasp and continuing on through the partnerships of Darius and Heraclitus, Shapur and Mani, Kavad and Mazdak, Khosrow and Buzurgmehr, the willingness to be advised by a philosopher or a council of sages was one of the signs of the rightly guided ruler who has the fad. This is the kingly glory symbolized by the originally Iranian artistic convention of the solar halo around the head, which entered European art through the spread of Mithraism and Asian art through the Iranian invention of Mahayana Buddhism. This ideal appeared in the West as Plato's doctrine of philosopher kingship. Plato was a member of the Pythagorean order, which was directly shaped by the Magi. The Magi in attendance of Plato's funeral recognized him as one of their own. So when Khusro Anushiravan invites the last pagan Platonic academicians banished from Byzantium to resume their studies in Sasanian Iran in the 6th century, it's really a homecoming. The meaning of justice, or dog, in Iranian civilization can be more clearly discerned with a view to the statesmanship of the ancient Persian emperors. Cyrus the Great was recognized as the ideal statesman by numerous classical Greek writers. This is because he was the first ruler who strived to improve the living conditions of conquered peoples rather than rape, plunder, and destroy their kingdoms. Darius the Great gives us insight into the mentality that was behind this unprecedented humanitarianism. In one of his inscriptions, he writes, "I desire what is right. I am not a friend of the man who follows the lie. I am not hot-tempered. The things that develop in me during a dispute I hold firmly under control through my mind. I am a firm ruler over myself." But this humanitarianism should not be confused with a liberal democratic attitude. The conception of Dod in ancient Iranian civilization is unequivocally aristocratic, as can be seen from another of Darius's royal inscriptions. "By the favor of Ahura Mazda, I am of such a kind that I am a friend of the right. It is not my desire that the weak man should suffer injustice at the hands of the strong, nor is it my desire that the strong man should suffer injustice from the weak." On this view, democracy is most certainly a tyranny of the majority. Nor should the aristocracy of a proper Persian imperial government be confused with oligarchy, or the tyranny of bankers and merchants, who often use the disorder of a democracy to manipulate the ignorant masses. Aristocracy is the rule of the best people, meaning the wisest and most cultivated people, in accordance with the ideal of Bahman, not the rule of the wealthiest people or those preoccupied with material gain. In fact, a concern with socioeconomic welfare is central to the traditional political form of Iranian civilization. We see this in the ideal of dahishmandi, or charitableness. There's no difference whatsoever between a genuine meritocracy and a true aristocracy, of the kind that Plato and Pythagoras advocate against Athenian democracy, and on the basis of their familiarity with Persian imperial culture. Herodotus tells us that aside from deceit, Persians saw indebtedness as the greatest evil, because, quote, "a debtor is bound to lie somewhat." Poverty and indebtedness have always been viewed by Iran's just rulers as the breeding grounds of criminality and deceitfulness. Consequently, poverty ought to be abolished. A just society is one with an economic system that organizes the production of goods and the distribution of resources in such a way that not a single person is poor. And every citizen is guaranteed a standard of living that affords them the possibility of cultivating human excellence to the maximum given their own potential. This is also why the First Persian Empire was the only pre-modern empire in history to ban slavery. Cuneiform seals attest to the fact that every menial laborer at the monumental construction site of Persepolis received a living wage for his or her work. At the zenith of the Sasanian period, in reaction against the rise of a very un-Iranian feudal system, this emphasis on dahishmandi, or socioeconomic justice, was taken to an extreme in the form of the communist revolution of Mazdak, court minister of the Persian Emperor Kavad, under the banner of the now infamous Red Flag. Tragically, this utopian revolution, which endured for an entire generation, shattered the Sasanian state in a way that facilitated the Arab-Muslim conquest a century later. To their credit, however, it is these same socialistic mystics the Khurramdinan, who led the long-standing Iranian insurgency against the Arabian Caliphate. As late as 2 centuries after the Arab-Muslim conquest of Iran, travelers to Azerbaijan, the Alborz Mountains, and the Caspian Sea coast witnessed communities resisting Islam and practicing radically socialist economics. Another striking element of these anti-Arab strongholds was the status of women, who were on a more equal footing with men than in any other pre-modern society. Throughout the entire classical Greek and Roman periods, to say nothing of the dark age that followed Europe's Christianization, Iranian women were far more free to flourish spiritually and materially than their European counterparts. The closest pre-modern European point of comparison to the status of Iranian women would be to Viking culture. And this is no accident, because the Goths rode together with an Iranian tribe known as the Alans and were deeply influenced by them. They founded a kingdom together in Spain known as Gothulania, or as we call it today, Catalonia. In particular, the Alans, who were a branch of the Sarmatians, brought the tradition of Javanmardi, or chivalry, into Europe. Numerous symbols, rites, and rituals of chivalric culture appear in Iranian civilization long before they do in Europe. These include horseback warfare with chainmail, armor and lances, the sword and the stone, trial of strength, the mystery of the Grail, the Knights of the Round Table, and most relevantly to our present subject matter, the idea of knights sworn to be the champions or pahlavans of land-owning noble women who were also the object of romantic love from roguish traveling poets and minstrels. The woman who owns her own estate and who is free to engage in romantic love affairs rather than being condemned to be the property of her father or husband is in the first instance an Iranian woman who has traveled from the Scythian and Sarmatian realms of the Iranian Caucasus and the Black Sea to Brittany and the area known as Occitan, southern France and Spain. She is a member of that Sarmatian warrior society where women were so revered that the Greeks mythologized them as Amazons. Although the Shahnameh, largely a legacy of these northern Iranian barbarians, is probably the greatest treasure trove of the chivalric ethos of Iranian civilization, one also sees Javanmardi in the conduct of the ancient Persian emperors. Cyrus repeatedly spared the lives of the kings that he defeated. The case of Croesus of Lydia is particularly instructive. He attacked Cyrus first, and yet Cyrus not only spared his life after conquering Lydia, he even turned Croesus into his most trusted advisor and made provisions for Croesus' safety in the event that Cyrus is killed. Cyrus's benevolence toward the Israelites, on account of which he winds up being the only historical figure referred to as Messiah in the Old Testament, is another expression of this chivalric generosity of spirit. When he sent the Persian army to rebuild their temple in Jerusalem at cost to the Persian treasury, it was because it pained his noble soul to see any minority displaced and persecuted. The tolerance, or ravadari, characteristic of the reign of Cyrus and his successors is another expression of this chivalric attitude. This free-spiritedness, or azadegi, survives the Arab-Muslim conquest, and cloaked in a Sufi garb, it's preserved by the order of the Assassins and the esoteric Persian religion of love, espoused by Rumi and other mystical poets. Tolerance and free-spiritedness also tend to be expressions of spiritual serenity. The idea that being ever more firmly rooted in the right order also yields an ever-increasing serenity, or sepandormat, is another fundamental idea of Iranian civilization. This abiding calm that comes over a contemplative and conscientious person is associated with the element of earth, and in this regard, it is one of 3 closely related principles that demarcate the ecological dimension of Zarathustra's message. Among the bounteous immortals of Zoroastrianism, Spenta Armaiti in Avestan, or Sepandormat in Middle Persian, is depicted as a feminine figure, a kind of Mother Earth goddess. Closely related to her is Khordad, the spirit of health or wholeness, which is associated with the element of water. The Iranian cult of Anahita, the Lady of the Lake and Virgin Mother of Mithra, who gives birth to him on the long night of the winter solstice, included baptism rituals with holy water that were intended to make one hail and confer a cleansing spiritual perfection. The idea here is not only that health follows from the intellectual discipline of Bahman and the serenity of Sepandarmaz, so that a disordered mind and a volatile life are unhealthy, but also that proper attention to bodily health and well-being is a prerequisite of success in seeking enlightenment. Khordad, or Harbata in Avestan, is one teaching of Iranian civilization that was badly disregarded by certain aspects of the Manichaean heresy that spread from Sasanian Iran to China and medieval Europe. Extreme asceticism on the Hindu model is anathema to Iranian civilization. This is one of the reasons why, when Iranians enacted the Mahayana reform of Buddhism, the Dharma left asceticism behind for a more life-affirming approach to enlightenment. Iranians conceive of the attainment of enlightenment in terms of amordad, or ameritat in Avestan. This is often translated as immortality, but it literally means undeadness in the sense of vitality. In other words, not being a zombie. Intellectual excellence, justice, chivalry, serenity, and health ultimately lead one to this superhuman or supremely human condition. Ancient Iranian metaphysics conceives of this in terms of an alchemical transformation of the human condition that takes place at the end of history. Remember, Iranian cosmology was unique in the ancient world for its teleological rather than cyclical conception of time and world ages. On the whole, Sepand Minu works to progressively and innovatively improve the human condition throughout successive epochs. After a final apocalyptic conflict, referred to both as the great event of choice and also as the Frashgard, or the renewal of existence, all of those who have chosen rightly to be champions of truth and justice attain their archetypally perfect form. This Farabahad acts as one's guardian angel during one's life, enjoining us to become who we are. Interestingly, in line with the unique reverence for women in Iranian civilization, the exteriorization of one's inner conscience, or da'ina, that one embodies after the apocalypse is feminine in form, whether one is now a man or a woman. She looks like a Valkyrie. But amordal does not only refer to personal immortality. It also has another meaning that connects it more closely to the aforementioned ecological principles of Zarathustra's message, in order to form the trio of serenity, health, and vitality. In this sense, amordad is associated with the element of vegetation, the lush greenery of trees, plants, fruits, and vegetables. It was considered a sacred duty to propagate agriculture so as to participate in the divine creation and make the living world more bountiful. This attitude had real consequences in terms of engineering. Iranians invented a technology known as the qanat in order to channel water across hundreds of miles so as to be able to make gardens bloom in the middle of deserts. A system of tunnels cut through rock, accessible from the surface through wells, and leading to dams and distribution channels, would act to artificially raise the water table and conduct water from aquifers to land that would otherwise be impossible to irrigate. The gardens that were created as a consequence of this engineering marvel were referred to as paradaiza, which is where our word paradise comes from. The concept of paradaiza can be seen as a metaphor for the governing philosophy of the Persian Empire. One can have a variety of flowers and crops growing in one's garden, and they're beautiful in their diversity. But in order to guard this variegated beauty, any hybridizations that take place must be well considered and carefully crafted. Most importantly, the garden has to be weeded, and harmful pests that threaten everything growing in there have to be eradicated. It's not difficult to imagine, in today's political geography, who falls into the category of such weeds and pests. At any rate, the construction of qanats is only one example of the Iranian civilizational idea of abad-sazi giti, the industrious beautification of the world. This idea, which we first witness in Zarathustra and only much later in the cult of Prometheus and in the Faustian spirit of the West, is a natural corollary to the belief that the wise God needs man as a friend, co-worker, and champion in the cosmic battle against Ahriman, the deceptive spirit of retardation. Because of Ahriman, the creation is not the best that it could be, and we can work together with Mazda to improve upon nature. The construction of the Suez Canal, a bridge across the Bosphorus, the first highway system, and the transcontinental postal service which employed it, the development of centralized banking and standardized coinage and credit, wind tunneling refrigeration systems, and the most massive and high-precision astronomical observatories in pre-modern times. These are just a few shining examples of Iranian industriousness. The so-called Islamic Golden Age is one expression of this Promethean or Faustian genius that really begins with that archaic futurist, Zarathustra. It is perhaps to be expected that an emphasis on joyousness is a corollary of this utopian mission to transform or renovate existence. In the Gathas of Zarathustra, the attainment of ushta, or radiant happiness, is seen as the ultimate consequence of a life devoted to righteousness for its own sake. We see the importance of shad zisti, or being joyous, in the fact that the Persians were the first people to celebrate the birthday of each individual, whereas in most ancient cultures prior to the First Persian Empire, only the birthdays of kings or other prominent personalities became an occasion for festivities. The Greeks found the celebration of each man and woman's birth, as if it were the birth of a king, to be rather odd, and another testimony to the titanic hubris or exceeding pride and arrogance of the Persians. Of course, this Persian custom later caught on in the West and became one of the most important markers of Western respect for the worth of the individual. Iranian civilization probably has more festive occasions than any other civilization, and all of them are positive in meaning and relevant to nature. Compare the meaning of Nowruz, Tirgan, Sadeh, and Yalda, the traditional pre-Islamic Iranian festivals of the equinoxes and the solstices, to grotesquely sacrificial and morbidly depressing holy days of the Abrahamic religions. The partisans of the Jorjani movement, who most formidably resisted the Arab occupation of Iran, have been accurately described as libertines, who, as successors to Mazdak, believed in attaining joy through overcoming the 5 demons of need, greed, envy, wrath, and vengeance. Essentially, it was a doctrine of unbinding and purifying desire, what essentially in the Hindu tradition they refer to as Tantra. It's true that, as Herodotus recounts, the ancient Persians used wine drinking to drop false pretenses and open themselves to inspiration while making policy. But the value of joyousness in Iranian civilization is also to be seen in this long-standing celebration of drunkenness, which survived the Arab-Muslim onslaught in the poetry of Khayyam, Rumi, and Hafez. Elegantly crafted mead horns are among the most well-attested treasures of Achaemenid period Iranian art. And the Sali is the central figure of Sufi poetry, despite Islam. Sali, or Saki, means friend, and is a reference to Mithra, or Lucifer, the bearer of light and love. Shaitani, capable of inspiring one to a creative power greater than that of Allah and the many sorrows that he sends our way. Remember these lines from Hafez. Should sorrow send forth an army, I and the Sali shall together conspire to scale heaven's dome and draw down a new design. These Luciferian verses, these ayat-e shaitani, epitomize the world historical mission of Iranian civilization. It is a historical mission that, even when it seems to deviate from some of the ideals that I've explicated, such as in the Manichaean heresy, actually reaffirms its essential character as a revolt against mundane reality and the merely human. Iranian civilization was already understood by the Greeks as perilously Promethean in its reach toward the titanic, Ahura'i, or superhuman, and in its irreverent demonization of gods, or devas, who sadistically manipulate mankind's basest inclinations. It is a historical mission that has been renewed by the Iranian Renaissance, in the same measure that the Faustian spirit of Western civilization was rekindled by the Italian Renaissance, a cultural zenith in European history that was undone by the decline into the materialism, egalitarianism, and sterile, reductive rationalism characteristic of the so-called Enlightenment. We, in the Iranian Renaissance, can learn from the derailing of the Renaissance in Europe and the nihilistic culmination of Western civilization. Our European cousins gave us this gift of hindsight, and when we prevail, perhaps Iranian civilization may offer the West a key to its own survival and redemption. Thank you very much.